Welcome back to yet another Rivals character video, and you guys voted for Heroes for Hire. Now, I'm not gonna pretend I don't know why this one won. We all know everyone loves Daredevil, and him not being in the roster only means he's coming at some point. So, in this video, we're gonna have a look at how you could possibly make both him and Power Man, or Luke Cage, since no one ever wants to call him by his hero name. But before we do that, let's start things off, as always, by quickly brushing up on the series rules.
What are the rules? What are the rules? What are the rules? What are the rules?
Firstly, this is just for fun, not serious or a request of any kind. Although hey, nays, feel free to use any of the ideas we've made so far on the channel. Secondly, we don't do exact numbers or stats. It saps a lot of the fun out of things, plus they change all of that every season anyway. Then, finally, if you have your own take on how these characters, or other characters for that matter, should be handled, then tell me in the comments. We have an awesome community of people who love to come in and make their own kits all the time. But let's just start this video off properly already and delve right into Power Man himself. Luke Cage. Luke Cage is a street-level hero from Harlem. He's an ex-convict who was unfairly imprisoned by the very people who gave him his powers. Now a free man, he became a hero, but in doing so, established one of the first superhero businesses in comic book history, the Heroes for Hire. When making these kits, I try to invoke a fantasy that fans of the given character would want to experience when playing as them, and for Cage, it has to be all about his one main ability, that indestructible skin. So that being said, he needs to walk through gunfire and come out the other side swinging. Sounds like a vanguard if you ask me. And with that, we can dive right into his kit. Let's start off with his attacks. And in this case, it's Cage Fighter. Basically, Luke Cage can swing mighty punches towards enemies. These would be powerful but slightly slow. However, there is a payoff. You see, if Luke Cage times his attacks right, he can actually negate incoming ranged attacks, or projectiles more specifically. This is one of those things where I'd imagine it'd be difficult and you can't rely on it, but if you are walking forwards, you want to be swinging that basic attack, because eventually you are going to punch a few of those bullets to sort of negate them. This wouldn't have any effect on hit scan stuff, and I don't know whether it should affect stuff like melee attacks towards him, because it's mainly there for closing distance. But I do think it'd be kind of fun if you could perfectly time your hits and they counter a Hulk punch. But I also understand that being like completely broken. It's mainly here to stop projectiles from coming in. He can just punch them and that invincible skin of his negates all the incoming damage. Talking of negating incoming damage, we then have Luke Cage's passive, Bulletproof. Now you see, due to being nigh indestructible, Luke Cage takes a constant damage reduction on all ranged attacks. Now this applies to both hit scan and projectile, it doesn't matter. As long as the attack isn't melee, Luke Cage gets a minor damage reduction from it. So this kind of acts a little bit like having higher health, but it doesn't apply to stuff like Wolverine or other melee fighters. It's more so just for that, once again, closing distances. But it does represent the idea of you walking through a hail of bullets and they don't do anything. That sort of iconic Luke Cage imagery. And when it comes to closing that distance, his abilities will mainly focus on that, starting off with Power Leap. This has Luke Cage launch himself forwards. In doing so, he has a slight arc where he does go into the air, helping him sort of crash through any maybe flyers. We'll get to why he might want to do that in a moment. But when he lands, he sort of creates a sinkhole that has a radius effect on enemies, pulling them in towards him. The closer the enemy is to where he lands, the more they're affected by this sort of pull. So if you're on the edge of the radius that gets pulled, you might only move a tiny bit. But if you're halfway across that radius, you're going to get pulled all the way to him. This means that if his leap isn't quite perfectly accurate on hitting enemies, since he can't control himself in mid-flight, he's still going to end up with them within punching distance, or at least close enough where he can try and close that distance. Now Power Leap goes hand in hand with his secondary ability, Lockdown. Lockdown has Luke Cage reaching out and grabbing a nearby foe and pinning them to him. Whilst an enemy is pinned to Luke Cage with Lockdown, he can move for a short duration before automatically dropping them, and during that duration, he has access to 2 different abilities, Danny's Fist and Tiger's Pounce, which would be mapped to the primary and secondary fire burns. Lockdown not only features a way to give Luke Cage more variety in what he can do, but it actually doubles as an anti-air mechanic when teamed up with Power Leap. You see, if he launches himself in the air and then lockdowns a flying enemy, he guarantees to bring them to the ground with him while they're pinned. So there's a bunch of different methods you could use this. You could also save it for after you land, and then when someone's pulled in, immediately lock down them to guarantee you have the best possible engagement when taking them on in a fight. There's a ton of different scenarios you could use this for. Say your backline's getting harassed by the enemy DPS, you could turn around, lock down that duelist, and guarantee that they're not dealing with your strategists, but instead have to deal with you. And then speaking of those 2 abilities it gives him, well, we'll start off on Danny's Fist, named aptly after his best friend, and also his daughter, who was named after his best friend, the first Iron Fist. You see, for those of you who don't know, when Luke Cage founded Heroes for Hire, he founded it with Iron Fist, specifically Danny Rand. And I'd imagine after years of fighting alongside him, he would have picked up a thing or 2. So the idea here is he's using Iron Fist technique to throw a super powerful punch that I would imagine would have one of the largest knockbacks on it in any sort of attack in the game. So this would be a super powerful damaging attack that also throws the enemy far away. You'd want to use this in one of 2 scenarios to guarantee an enemy's off of someone, so you're throwing them out of the group, or if, say, an enemy's already low on health, you can use this to finish them off. And of course, I'm not gonna lie, you could also probably have some funny moments where you use it to throw someone off a map as well. But when Luke Cage is dealing with someone he wants to take down himself, and they're still on full health, he's probably going to switch over to Tiger's Pounce. Named after White Tiger, another member of the Heroes for Hire and a classic street level hero in the Marvel Universe, White Tiger likely would have taught Luke Cage some moves as well in their years working together. And this has Luke Cage pouncing with his enemy, tossing himself forwards kind of like Power Leap but with a lower arc so he doesn't go that high off the ground, and it would be a shorter distance. This sort of has 2 effects that occur. If he just leaps forward and crashes into nothing, he will then drop the enemy. They'd have a chance to move away, obviously, and it just sort of moves them, I guess. Whereas if he actually crashes into a wall, however, he will stun them for a very short period of time and then get a chance to land some attacks. What this means is you can crash someone into a corner, land a few attacks before they can even start moving, and then by the time they can move, you've got them walled off and in a position where you can damage them. In addition, the actual crash into the wall would deal a little bit of damage to them and the wall itself if it's a breakable wall, but it wouldn't be the same level as damage as, say, Danny's Fist. That's why you get the stun, so that you can then land the additional Cage Fighter hits to actually lower their health. Of course, the main goal in any of these hero shooters is to really build up that ult, aside from obviously doing a good roll job and actually doing whatever the mission of the match is. But when it comes to your abilities and your cooldowns, you do want to be building some of that ult wherever you get the chance. And if you're mitigating your damage and landing your attacks, pulling those flyers out of the sky and just removing any duelists that are diving in, you're gonna get your hands on Unchained. Unchained pushes Power Man's bulletproof skin to its max. Basically, all damage that comes towards you is now affected by the bulletproof damage reduction, and that damage reduction amount is increased, along with Power Man's strength. And to top it off, Power Leap is replaced with a new ability, Power Slam. Power Slam basically just applies what the end of Power Leap would be, that being the sinkhole. When you ult, this also instantly resets that cooldown, and when the ult timer runs out, it instantly resets the cooldown. So what this means is you can Power Leap into an engagement, immediately ult upon landing, Power Slam to guarantee everyone's within range, start throwing out your increased damage swings, make sure people are trying to shoot towards you, taking the new reduced damage, and then when the ult ends and that damage reduction's gone and you're starting to take full damage, you quickly Power Leap out of the engagement. Or, if you've been successful, there's no longer an engagement because your team won the team fight. And whilst this seems like a completely finished kit, there's one other thing. Team-ups. What is a hero without a team-up, especially in the case of a businessman who represents not only his neighborhood, but acts as a face for all the heroes who've ever worked under his company? So Luke Cage gets 2 of them. The first one being Fantastic Fours. This is to represent the brief time Luke Cage actually spent on the Fantastic Four when the Thing was out of commission. So, if on the same team as the Thing, he gains access to Unyielding Will, the Thing's passive ability, making both of them immune to any form of moving mechanics such as knockback, lift up, pull in, or anything that would displace them. What this means is when you're facing a team with both Luke Cage and the Thing on them, you basically can't move those tanks. They act as a unstoppable wall. But you're probably wondering, what about the other team up given its name? And this is Heroes for Hire. That's likely what it would be called under Luke Cage's. It would probably have him joining Shang-Chi and Luna Snow's team up, given theirs is only a 2-man team up, and this would involve Iron Fist as the anchor. Basically, Luke Cage uses his history from working with Danny to access some of Iron Fist's chi. He'll have a button that he can press, a team up button, where he enters his chi enhanced mode, punching his fists together. While this is enhanced, his basic attack, Cage Fighter, is faster and stronger. Basically, it just means you start throwing out those punches in more of an Iron Fisty way than a Luke Cagey way. I think this is a really nice way to pay homage to their friendship and the importance the 2 characters have had in each other's history. I know I already have Danny's fist as an ability, but I also think just since we have an Iron Fist in the game, it's nice to have the team up there just to represent all the history between the 2 characters. That being said, we would usually now move on to the map and skins for this season pit. However, as many of you may know, we just started a new series on the channel, making a DC hero shooter, or as you guys voted to call it, Infinite Crisis. And I'm happy to announce we are making another new series on the channel called Comics and Tea, which is focused on talking about comics and comics related topics outside of Marvel Rivals. Something I know a lot of you would be really interested in, and something I really want to start doing. That being said, the beginning of 2 new series has taken up a bunch of time I'd usually dedicate to the channel. So for this video, we'll be skipping this segment and moving straight on to the man without fear, the Catholic demon himself, the lawyer from Hell's Kitchen, Daredevil. Matt Murdock is a blind lawyer and a devoutly religious man who beats up criminals in his free time dressed as a red or sometimes yellow devil. The idea I based his kit around is a mix of the classic acrobatic martial artist he visually presents himself to be, and the blind man using sonar to track and predict enemies I know a lot of fans have wanted from him when he gets added into the game. So, he will be a duelist and focus on countering invisible supports and stealthy assassins. I also want to give him a reverse Moon Knight mechanic, where instead of where Moon Knight throws his unks as targets and then rebound shots between groups to break them up, Daredevil would have some form of way of targeting a single individual and then focus his attacks in on them. Kind of acting as a not assassin archetype assassin, but that probably doesn't make that much sense explaining it without showing you the kit, so let's just dive right into it, starting off with his most iconic ability, Echolocation. Now this would be a passive for Daredevil, and it basically gives him the power to see sound, more specifically the sound of his enemies. All sounds in the game will be classified as either major or minor. It wouldn't take any massive editing going back through noises, it would basically just be when abilities are activated. That ability is also considered a loud or a lesser sound, a major or minor sound, sorry. An example of major sounds would be stuff like alt voice lines, gunfire, explosions, anything that would obviously sound loud. And tracking it could be done by just basic skill of the game and having a 3D headset on. This would, so long as it's within a radius of him, show you a visual indicator of where it is. I imagine it being just like a coloured circle, and it would affect through walls as well. So you'd be able to see exactly through a wall where it is or anything like that, and it would be marked on his visuals as a major sound. The more interesting part of this passive, however, and what I feel like a lot of people want from this character, is how he views minor sounds. Now the way I handle this is stuff like dashes, footsteps, double jumps. and the quieter abilities in the game would create a small, semi-transparent disc at the base of that character, on the floor, basically. What this means is if you try to sneak up on Daredevil as, say, Invisible Woman or Psylocke, he will see you as you're walking over, he will see that little disc on the ground. Now, the reason why I say make it semi-transparent and kind of faint is because I don't want it to be blaringly obvious to Daredevil. The idea is these are quiet sounds, he has to be on the lookout to see them, but also the closer you are to him, the more obvious it's going to be as he just sees this disc on the floor in front of him that's moving about. It would basically allow for moments like this.
He became aware of another. He became aware of the... I see you.
And I think that could be so fun and exactly what people want for him. But he does have the rest of his kit, so let's just move on to his next feature, and sort of what I revolved most of his playstyle around. That being the Echo Marker. When he activates his ability, he'd have like a really long-ranged melee attack he'd perform that does really low damage, but if it hits someone, it applies an Echo Marker to them. Now, outside of his ult, Echo Markers, the way they last is they will disappear when an enemy is KO'd, as in the enemy with one, or when he places an Echo Marker on a different enemy. But whilst an Echo Marker is on an enemy, so long as they're within the same distance as his Echo location, their outline is constantly revealed to him. In addition to this, it would sort of interact with his basic attack, which I'll go over now. So his main attack is through the form of his billy clubs, that iconic weapon we always see him using. Now, if you were to press the melee button, he would obviously use the billy clubs as a melee, but the primary fire button has him throwing them. They work kind of like Cap's shield when he throws that. So you throw them and then they come back to your hand and you throw the next one, sort of thing. So they go through the air, then come back, then you throw again. It isn't a case of just like tossing out 1,000,001 billy clubs like how Moon Knight works with his darts. However, the billy clubs have a secondary feature. Whilst they have a limited range when you throw them, if they hit any form of surface, that be a wall, ceiling or floor, they will bounce off that surface and fly the normal throw distance again. Now, to accompany the long wait times, basically because he has 2 billy clubs, you can have at least 2 in the air. So if you're still waiting on the first billy club to bounce back to his hand, you can throw that second billy club. Now, if a billy club were to hit a second wall or just reach the max distance, they would then immediately fly back. Or if a billy club hits an enemy, it also immediately flies back. Now, here's where Echo Markers come into play. You see, if a billy club hits a surface or an enemy, and then a different enemy, or just if it hit a surface, in the case of that, which be an enemy, with an Echo Marker attached to them is within a short radius of where the billy club landed, instead of just ricocheting off like it normally would, it will purposefully target that enemy and sort of auto-aim bounce into them. Kind of like how Squirrel's ult will, when it hits a wall, target the nearest enemy, or how when you hit an Unk, Moon Knight's dart will then fly to an enemy within range of that Unk. That's generally how this works, but like I said, you are purposefully targeting whoever has the Echo Marker. So this is sort of how the majority of his gameplay would work. You track people with echolocation, land the Echo Marker on them, and then punish them with billy club bounces. But he does have methods of getting around to the enemies he needs to attack. Those main 2 methods would be in the form of his grapple line and grapple swing, which would share a cooldown and would have like a banked system, like how the Bubbles or Spider-Man's web swings work, where you can have multiple of them ready for you to use. When on the ground, the input would activate grapple line, whereas if he's in the air, it activates grapple swing. Grapple line has him pointing a billy club in the air, firing a rope and launching himself directly upwards. So there's no real forward momentum or anything like that, you can't aim it, it just fires him upwards. But that sets him up for grapple swing, pressing which has him swing both hands on the billy club like a trapeze swing, and he'll swing forwards kind of like Spider-Man does. I'd imagine this would also have like an easy swing and a complicated swing in the settings switch that you can change like Venom and Spidey both let you do. And then all of this can be comboed with his final ability, Devil's Strike. Now, Devil's Strike wouldn't exactly be anything super special, it's mainly just his primary way of dealing a little extra damage when someone's close up. It's a really wide range melee attack that has a big knockback on it, so you can knock back an enemy after Echo Markering them and then focus on the billy club. It should be something you try and combo with it. The other thing is it would try and, for most enemies, knock them back into a position where even if you don't have an Echo Marker, throwing a billy club directly down in front of them would have it bounce up and hit them. That sort of range is how it will keep them. So it's making sure your enemies are in the right position for Daredevil to fight them. And of course, as you deal damage and do your job as a duelist, you're going to build up that ult meter, which in this case would be the ability Radar Sense. Now radar sense is often what Daredevil's vision is referred to, and in this case it is going to affect your vision too. I think a cool sort of like visual effect would be if you as the player suddenly view the game in radar sense. Now I understand if that can't be done, but realistically it's just a filter you slap over everything, so I don't see it being too difficult, but I think it could be super fun if they can do it. Whilst in radar sense, all enemies have echo markers attached to them, and Daredevil's billy club, when it hits an enemy with echo marker, so long as there's another enemy with an echo marker within range, will ricochet to that enemy, basically making his billy club work like Moon Knight's Unks, but slightly higher damage than Moon Knight's Unks. In addition, all enemies are revealed to him, like their outline, and to all his allies. And then to finish it off, during this time, Daredevil has a speed boost, meaning that you can move around really quickly, get to that right angle, throw out your billy club at a wall, and watch as it bounce through groups of enemies, dealing mass damage. Moon Knight's kind of balanced in how he does damage to groups with the fact that his darts don't actually deal that much damage, but I imagine given the billy clubs are mainly focused on dealing on one person and not groups, they would have a higher threat level to them. So this could be really intense. On top of that, you are revealing all of your enemies' locations to all of your allies. I just think that could be really cool. But just like Luke Cage, Daredevil loves to appear in crossovers and team-ups. So here's what I came up with for his ones. The first of which is Asgardian Work. Now this is not only referencing the amount of times Daredevil teams up with Spider-Man given they both live in New York, but it's also referencing the fact that both him and Spidey have been given Asgardian artifacts due to their worthiness and just general awesomeness as superheroes. So Spider-Man would get Asgardian web shooters and Daredevil would get Asgardian batons, specifically his Yggdrasil batons that he got in the comic books. I think it could be really fun. Basically, the way this works is whenever either of them use the swing abilities they have, they gain a non-stackable speed boost for a short duration. The reason why I specify non-stackable is if they swing 3 times in a row, they don't get triple the speed boost. It's just the third swing would reset the speed boost to full, as in the amount of time it has on it left. But the actual boost itself would be the exact same flat rate, just to stop them from being able to like get insane benefits. But it does mean when you swing into an area, you suddenly start attacking faster and generally doing things quicker, which can really help you. It also means when running away with a swing, you can cover more distance thanks to your speed. And then his secondary team up, kind of like Luke Cage, has him interacting with a pre-existing team up in the game. That being Hawkeye and Black Widow's team up. Daredevil gets super sensory hearing. Now initially this doesn't seem too amazing, the fact that he's teaming up with that, he can just see after images, but then it has a unique effect with his billy club, which is so long as the person with the after image on them has an echo tracker, or it's during his ult, the billy clubs will ricochet between both them and the echoes, which means you're basically dealing double or in some cases triple damage on echo marked enemies, so long as that after image is also there. And I think that could be really cool and really powerful, so you'd have to be careful with, but definitely could work. If not this, then I could see him having some sort of interesting team up with maybe Moon Knight to sort of pay homage to the fact that their kits are designed very similarly. And that's our breakdown. I am so thankful for all the support you guys have been giving the channel. And whilst I'm expanding it into more series, don't worry. These pitches aren't going anywhere. In fact, now's your chance to vote on the next Marvel Rivals pitch we make. The vote closes when our next DC Rivals video drops, so make sure to pick what you want to see. The theme for this vote is all about crossovers in the game's future. We'd cover 3 characters instead of 2. So what would you guys want to see? An Invincible pitch for Mark, Rex, and Red Rush? A Ben 10 pitch for Ben, Gwen, and Kevin? A My Hero Academia pitch for Deku, Bakugo, and Todoroki? Or a Transformers pitch, creating Optimus Prime, Megatron, and Soundwave? I can't wait to see what you guys vote for, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.